So I said, use the force. Well, they didn't take that one well. You know how it is.
Oh, hi. My name's Frank Downs, and I'm the Senior Director for Advisory and Assessment Solutions here at ISACA. If you're like me and most of our members, you've realized that cybersecurity doesn't take a break during this pandemic. In fact, a survey of our members recently identified that cybersecurity is getting much higher consideration and priority because of this pandemic. Well, how do you make sure that you're safe? Well, the key is cybermaturity. In fact, organizations that have a stronger cybermaturity stance have been doing better during these uncommon times. Let's go ahead and take a look. Here's the agenda of what we'll be going over in this presentation. First, we're going to talk about pandemics and how they change the cyber landscape. Then, we're going to go over the old threats that are becoming new again, keeping in mind that if you've read any of the state of cybersecurity research that ISACA has done over the several years, you'll realize that many of the attacks that are prevalent aren't newly invented, but are just reinvigorated depending on the circumstances at the time. Then we're going to take some looks at how unsuccessful transitions have happened during the pandemic. We're going to specifically focus on some of the struggles that telehealth has had. Then we're going to discuss some of the successful transitions to remote work, specifically looking at banks and discussing what they've done in order to pivot during this stressful time. Finally, we're going to discuss how the common thread for the organizations that perform well in this time of crisis is cybermaturity. The worldwide pandemic has touched everyone at different levels. Across the globe, people are taking additional steps and implementing new routines into their daily lives in order to help slow the spread of the coronavirus. Many individuals are experiencing remote work for the first time, while companies are realizing that a dispersed workforce comes with unique opportunities and challenges. One of the challenges for organizations that has been underscored by the global pandemic is the increased need for a mature cybersecurity program, one which accounts for less controllable employee access, diverse platforms for business engagement, and sundry hardware and operational access. As the workforce has become more remote through the pandemic, each organization has implemented specific requirements for accessing corporate assets and conducting business. These changes have been sweeping in scope and unique to each organization. For example, many schools have approached the pandemic and stay-at-home orders by enabling student access through online portals. Most colleges and universities were able to smoothly transition into a complete online experience, with physical student out-processing posing the greater challenge. However, many secondary schools had no continuity of operations plan for a pandemic scenario, leaving several school districts scrambling to develop platforms and mechanisms for students to learn remotely. One of the greater challenges to these efforts was ensuring access to online resources for students who, while required to attend school, did not receive compulsory or consistent access to the internet. Although programs exist for remote student access, few school districts integrated these options. As such, many students are forced to rely on an impromptu, bring-your-own-device experience at their homes, with some having inconsistent access or unreliable connections. Questionable connectivity to online assets is not the only concern companies, schools, and other organizations face during this pandemic. Specifically, as online interaction has increased, the scrutiny of the services and platforms providing connectivity has increased as well. One example of this scrutiny are the privacy and security questions that companies such as Zoom have faced over the last week. As companies and teachers have begun to adopt Zoom to host online meetings and classes, students and workers have taken advantage of default settings that can allow them to take over the meeting presentation and display any content of their choosing, ranging from the hilarious to the profane. Thus, the term Zoom bombing was coined, and the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation was forced to issue warnings about the software. Service selection challenges further compound the remote working and learning issue when considered in conjunction with the disparate or non-existent hardware policies that organizations maintain. Specifically, when developing remote work policies, Many companies and organizations find BYOD policies alluring. However, without a consistent system type at each endpoint, companies are unable to fully implement a uniform security policy. As such, organizations with low cybersecurity maturity present attackers with a smorgasbord of options and exploitation opportunities, as each system type carries a different vulnerability profile with unique attack points. Unless BYOD is thoughtfully considered and the appropriate security controls are in place, organizations remain at serious risk of exploitation. Cross-site scripting has been a concern for cybersecurity professionals for decades. It's a type of attack wherein an attacker injects malicious scripts into content from trusted sources. It's commonly leveraged through malicious ads posted on unsuspecting websites or emails. These malicious scripts are executed in the victim's browser, oftentimes seeking out vulnerabilities on the system to exploit. As the pandemic has spread over recent months, attackers have taken advantage of the situation to leverage their tactic more effectively. In one example, Russian cyber criminals leveraged cross-site scripting embedded in an email attachment and disguised as Johns Hopkins pandemic data to gain access to victim systems. Through leveraging the interest in pandemic information that the general population is actively seeking, the hackers can increase their odds of successfully exploiting an individual system. Phishing also has increased since the start of the pandemic. Hackers have realized that many people online are actively interested in a potential cure or preventative concoction for the COVID-19 virus. Taking advantage of this interest, hackers have increased their phishing attacks by sending emails specifically advertising preventative measures and mixtures. However, these emails are simply misleading disguises to gather information from victims, such as credit card information, addresses, and other personally identifiable information. Another recent phishing scam impersonated an official email from the World Health Organization, wherein links to purported prevention documentation attempted to harvest username, credentials, and passwords. Organizations typically have policies to help prevent phishing attacks at the user level. However, as individuals conduct more business outside of the office, companies are realizing that many of their on-site policies do not translate into remote policies. As such, habits that individuals exercised at the office should not be extended to remote work settings without additional security considerations. Protection mechanisms such as Cloudflare, which can protect a user from redirection, may not be configured for remote use. This, in turn, provides attackers with additional opportunities to gain access to corporate systems. Another attack type on the rise during the pandemic is the use of ransomware. In early March, a new Windows ransomware emerged called NetWalker. What makes this malware unique is that it leverages coronavirus emails as bait. More specifically, it targets the healthcare sector. Similar attacks, which have happened over the last 2 years, have brought entire health industries in Europe to a halt. If this campaign is successful, it could result in physical loss of life during the pandemic. However, it is important to remember that ransomware is avoidable if an aggressive patch management policy is in place and observed by the professionals responsible for its maintenance and application. Ransomware is not the only tool being used to attack the healthcare sector. Distributed denial of service, DDoS, attacks have been leveraged against government organizations and private companies alike since the start of the pandemic, as businesses have become more reliant on the internet for daily operations. This type of attack is simple to leverage by hackers, as botnets are easily leased through open markets on the dark web. The stakes for the attackers are low, but the impact on the victims can be catastrophic. As the pandemic has continued, organizations have met its challenges with various degrees of success, much of which is determined by their level of cyber maturity. Two examples are telehealth and the financial institutions. Telehealth, still a newer capability in the health industry, has seen a sudden surge in use over the last few months. As such, organizational procedures, policies, and capabilities were put to the test in an attempt to meet this new increase in demand. While some organizations were prepared for the impact, many were not, with the inconsistent consultation strategies, tech usage, or policy awareness impacting users on all ends of the experience. Compared to the financial institutions, which for decades now have relied on online engagements, with some banks even existing completely online, telehealth still has some growing pains in store. So how can I make sure that I'm mature enough to operate comfortably without the concern of certain incidents impacting me? Well, there's a couple different ways to assess your cyber maturity. The key components are 1. Understanding risk. What's my risk profile look like? What am I most concerned about happening? What will have the biggest impact on my business operations? Do I think that'll happen often, or is it not really a big deal? Then, you need to understand what controls are applicable to your organization. What kind of cybersecurity controls, such as asset monitoring, incident response plans, patch management, DLP implementation? How often are these things evaluated? Have we not had an update in the organization for, a couple years? Don't worry, you're not alone. The important thing is that you need to take an honest assessment of your capability and then determine what the path ahead should be. CMMI and ISACA have a tool specifically called the CMMI Cybermaturity Platform, which can help enable this for organizations. If you're interested, please feel free to reach out.